Hey, what is up guys? MurderMan4 here, and today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts and opinions on the Ghost Monument, which is the second episode of Doctor Who Series 11. This episode actually serves kind of like a second introduction to the series, so it's a little bit different from your typical episode 2. And I'm going to be breaking down my thoughts on how it delivered on that and how it delivered as an individual episode. So first off, I want to talk about the brand new title sequence. Of course, we didn't get the title sequence in The Woman Who Fell to Earth. Still not entirely sure why. The only really logical reason that makes sense now is that they wanted to use up every minute of screen time because one of the common theories was that it was not present to represent the TARDIS not being there, but TARDIS isn't even in this title sequence, so can't be that. So we have a title sequence for this episode, which is great, and so what do I think of it? Well, I have to say, at first I was underwhelmed. I've watched it a bunch of times, a bunch of times by now, trying to get used to it, because of course when something's brand new, it is going to feel really weird, and I have started to like it and appreciate it a lot more, but I still think it's lacking in some areas. But basically, first things first, what I do like about it is, as I predicted last week based off of the end titles, it is basically a modernized version of the Howl-Around sequences of the original 3 title sequences, and I do love that. It does look gorgeous in that regard. It's a perfect representation of a modern version of the original title sequences, which is great. And upon first watching it, I did find it a bit jarring that it didn't have the TARDIS in it, because the last time the TARDIS wasn't in the title sequence was in 1986. That's 6 title sequences ago. So it's kind of become a staple. But I guess, harkening back to those older ones, it makes sense to not have the TARDIS, because the first time that the TARDIS did appear in the title sequence was 1974, after all those Howl-Around ones. And while the TARDIS is, of course, a vital part of Doctor Who, I don't think that it's necessarily vital for the title sequence itself. And so I think it works fine without it. I am slightly disappointed that the opening bars are cut short. Usually we have 4 opening bars. However, in the classic series, starting with the Third Doctor's title sequence, it got shortened to 2 opening bars, and then with the Seventh Doctor's sequence, they removed the opening bars entirely. But we returned to the 4 opening bars with 2005's Rose, and I'm really disappointed now that we've lost that again, because I've never been a fan of, the shortening of the theme music. And now it's technically even slightly shorter than that too, because the second bar kind of gets cut off, as it does a kind of, sounds almost like a bass droppy kind of thing, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I wish it just had all 4 opening bars there, so that's slightly disappointing. That's a minor little niggle. I also kind of wish that the logo came in a little bit differently. I don't know, it just seems kind of generic, it forming from this golden dust. And I saw a much more cool version of the logo coming into existence and disappearing as well. On Reddit, somebody had posted, in the summertime, Twitch did a whole bunch of streams of the classic Doctor Who episodes, and alongside them, they had these little shows going on, and it had its own title sequence with the new logo. And the way that, the logo came in and went out looked really cool. I think it's much cooler than the effects that they use in this sequence. What they use still looks fine. It's still good, but it's not as good as we've seen, I don't think, and as good as it could be. The major disappointment for me is that it doesn't have the face in it, which I guess makes sense because the original title sequence didn't have the face, but it became a staple of the series for the rest of Classic Who. The first Doctor's title sequence is the only classic sequence to not have the face. And then the TV movie didn't have the face, and it didn't return again until Matt Smith's second title sequence around the 50th anniversary year. But I loved that the face came back, and it was in both Matt Smith's second sequence and Peter Capaldi's title sequence, and I was really hoping that it would be in this sequence too, because as cheesy as it is, it has a certain kind of charm to it that I absolutely love, and in all honesty, it is my favorite part of the title sequence, just in general. It's the part I like the most, and I think that the last two title sequences showed that it is possible to integrate the face into the modern title sequence without seeming too cheesy. It can be done pretty well, and I think they could have done that here too. So it's really disappointing for me to not see the face, because I love the face. I just love the face. I think the thing that maybe, I guess, makes this sequence not quite work for me the most is the fact that it feels like a fan title sequence. That's honestly what I felt like from the first time that I saw it, and as it turns out, it's because, in a way, it is a fan title sequence. There is a YouTuber that's called John Smith, obviously not his real name. He's been doing his own fan VFX stuff about Doctor Who ever since 2013. It started with this fake trailer for the 50th anniversary special. And he's done all sorts of VFX stuff on there, and it's phenomenal. He's done some phenomenal work. And he actually was hired to do some VFX work on some episodes last year. So he worked on World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls, I think The Doctor Falls as well, and Twice Upon a Time. And I didn't realize he was actually commissioned to make this title sequence, and the reason it felt like a fan title sequence to me is that it actually looks very similar to a VFX sequence that he uploaded to his YouTube channel a couple years ago. And so inherently that's not a bad thing. It's just, I don't know, I can't really describe it. There's just something about it that just doesn't quite feel maybe as professional as previous title sequences. I don't know how to describe it. And don't get me wrong, it still does look very good. And he's done an amazing job. It's nothing against him and his work, but it's just some sort of aspect about it, which it just bugs me a little bit. So, yeah, it's a good title sequence. It's not perfect, and I do love the inspiration it's taken from the original. But I would say, at least in terms of modern title sequences, it's a bit difficult to judge against the classic sequences because they are often of their time, of course. But I would say it beats Matt Smith's first title sequence for me because I'm not a fan of the Thunderclouds at all, and maybe his second sequence. But the Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant title sequence and the Peter Capaldi title sequence I think I definitely like more than this one. But anyway, that's just the title sequence. That's, in terms of this episode, a minor detail. So why don't we start talking about the Ghost Monument itself. It continues off from last episode's cliffhanger, and unfortunately it resolves it like that. I hate when cliffhangers do that. It's like, I know it's the purpose of the cliffhanger is just to get you to the next adventure. In this case, it's not to be, a part of the plot. It's to get you to the next adventure. But I don't know, it just makes the cliffhanger feel so utterly pointless when you resolve it that quick. But anyways, they get separated, the group. The Doctor and Yaz end up on a spaceship with this one pilot, Epso, and then Graham and Ryan end up on this other spaceship with, I can't remember her name. Maybe it'll come back to me at some point. I did like this opening sequence, particularly, we're kind of following from Yaz's perspective as she wakes up from the medical pod, and she finds the Doctor trying to save the ship from crash landing, and Jodie Whittaker is just completely the Doctor in this scene. And it's great to see her doing this. She just takes total command, and it's a really exhilarating sequence, especially with the new kind of visual style to it, which is another thing I want to talk about actually. It works very well. The visual style is continuing to impress. The CGI is fantastic. Easily, it's the best CGI the show has ever had. And also the cinematography in this episode looks beautiful. The episode looks stunning. Unfortunately, at the same time, though, as much as I did like that opening bit, the episode does have a lot more issues with it, mainly in that it's just not memorable. And I walked away from that episode with the visual style of it being the most memorable part, which is kind of an issue because with Doctor Who, you need to be telling compelling stories with compelling villains or monsters or characters. The story itself has got to be compelling. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that visuals shouldn't or cannot be praised. Absolutely they should, and absolutely they can. But I don't think that the visuals should be the predominant part of the story. I think they should help to tell the story and not be the most memorable part of the story. And unfortunately, that's mainly a place where I find the Ghost Monument to fall flat. First off, first we need a little bit of context. So, they're crash landing on this planet called Desolation. The reason that they ended up in space was because the planet isn't in its natural orbit, but these two spaceships are heading to the planet Desolation, and so they all end up there. Somehow they happen to end up at the same place on the planet. Now these two different spaceships and the pilots, they are participating in a race, so they are, trying to head to the same destination, but they end up landing pretty much exactly the same spot, which is especially coincidental because the second ship is crash landing. But anyway, fine, they crash land, everyone gets back together again, and then we have our two groups of leads, Yaz and the Doctor, and Graham and Ryan, and they are saying to each other, "Oh, I thought you were dead. Oh, thank goodness you're alive," which, makes sense. But in terms of story, it feels like that moment isn't really deserved, I guess. It just doesn't feel like it fits unless the audience has felt like they've been apart for a really long time. But from an audience perspective, it's only been a couple of minutes. So that moment of relief isn't really felt by the audience. It's not really a relief that they're back together because from our perspective, they've barely been apart. And so that to me felt like it would be a more fitting moment much later in the episode, but of course with the story this is trying to tell, that just wouldn't fit. This is just an excuse to get them to the planet. So in all honesty, I can't really see a reason for them to have been separated in the first place. Speaking of which, I mentioned it is a race. It's a race across, I can't remember, a lot of planets and terrains, and it's a big race. I think it had 4,000 contestants at the beginning. And this is the final planet, the final destination on this race. Now, I like this concept a lot. The only thing I really wish is it kind of sucks being put into the story at the very end of the race because you don't really get a sense of the scale or the size or the impact of the race because you're only following the final two contestants at the last destination. And that's usually, a pretty exciting part of the race. But often because you've got, the knowledge of what has happened before, because at this point you're not really invested in these people, or you're not really familiar with the trials that they've had to face to get here, so the emotional impact of that is lessened. Now obviously I don't expect them to show the entire race from start to finish. That would be very difficult, especially in a 50-minute episode, but I do think that we should have at least seen one other location and a couple other contestants just so we could get a sense of what this race is like. Because for the most part, aside from our two contestants' attitudes towards each other, it doesn't really feel like a race, honestly, because everyone's moving at the same pace and they're essentially working together. And it would have just been really good to get a greater sense of that, and being able to see another location and other contestants and other threats, it ups the stakes and makes you feel more emotionally attached to these other people. And I just remembered the other contestant's name. It's Angstrom. Epso and Angstrom. So I'll be using her name from now on too. So we do have a couple of brief scenes with the guy who seems to be heading the race, Ilan, and so he provides us with some important information. Most notably about what the Ghost Monument is. So it turns out, I don't know how many people would be surprised by this, but it turns out the Ghost Monument is the TARDIS, and I feel like it would have been better if that was left to be a reveal later in the episode. Especially because it kind of makes this whole episode entirely about getting to the TARDIS. And everything else doesn't really matter too much, I guess. And so everyone's off on their way, and the Doctor, Yaz, Ryan, and Graham obviously follow Angstrom and Epso so that they can also get to the Ghost Monument. And it's at this point where my main issues start to come to the forefront. First off, I just don't understand how these two are the final two contestants out of 4,000 people. And this is something that seeing more of the race definitely would have helped with. The problem is, they're pretty much useless on this planet. I can't think of a single situation they were in where either Epso or Angstrom was the one who solved the problem. It was the Doctor or one of her companions every time. And so it just left me wondering, how would these people have gotten anywhere without either of them? Because they essentially, the Doctor and the companions lead the way. They solve all the problems. They're the ones who fix the boat to get, to the ruins. They're the ones who discover where, that they need to go into the tunnels. They're the ones who figure out how to destroy the ribbon creatures. I think they're called remnants. All that stuff. And so they just felt like useless characters. Now, I liked them as characters. I thought they were characterized well, and the acting all around I really liked in this episode. But it's just their roles. Their roles in the episode were pretty poor, I think. They really only served to flesh out the plot a bit more, because you obviously can't really have a race if you don't have any contestants. But they really should have done some of the problem solving here. Likewise, you don't want to have the Doctor and her companions seem completely useless either, but you got to get a mix. Because now it makes me wonder how these two were the ones who got to the end. And I'd also like to mention two other things that annoyed me throughout this episode. They're minor things. They're essentially just nitpicks, but they bugged me when I was watching it. Especially the second time, I found it a lot more noticeable. So they're both things that the Doctor did. First one is, she used the sonic screwdriver a lot. Now, I guess excessive use of the sonic screwdriver is better than overpowered use of the sonic screwdriver. She didn't use the sonic screwdriver for anything that I would say is, a deus ex machina. At least it didn't solve the plot. But, man, she used it for a lot of things. And please, Chibnall, tone down the sonic screwdriver use in future episodes. I'm all for using the sonic screwdriver, but use it once, maybe twice. I kept track, and I tried keeping track. I counted at least 10 different instances of her using the sonic screwdriver. That's 10 instances of her pulling it out, using it, and putting it away again. Not using it, still holding it in her hand, and using it for something else. That's putting it away and pulling it out again. That at least 10 times. That's way too much. In a 50-minute episode, that's an average of once every 5 minutes. And that's a lot. You should not be relying on the sonic screwdriver so much. And it also kind of annoyed me because, also just for plot reasons too, the sonic screwdriver seemed to be the Doctor's go-to whenever there was any sort of issue whatsoever. The main one I'm thinking of was when Epso was about to get strangled to death by the remnant, and she starts buzzing it with a sonic screwdriver. She's not doing anything. She's just buzzing it with a sonic screwdriver and saying nothing's working. But all she's doing is pointing the sonic screwdriver at him. Of course nothing's working. You have to actually do something. Pull the thing off. That moment really annoyed me. I'm sorry. Oh, well, I guess, there we go. That's something that Angstrom was useful for. She cut off the remnant so Epso didn't die. But, no, seriously. That's just way too much sonic screwdriver. Tone it down. 1 or 2 uses per episode, please. Don't have the Doctor pull it out at every possible instance. And then the other thing, too, was there was a lot of question asking, particularly from the Doctor, particularly the same question, asking what happened to this planet and where did all the people go. That's a fair question. That's a perfectly fair question. And it's fine, if you're wondering that, but I think she asked that same question or a variation of that question 4 or 5 times before she got the answer, and it's like, okay, we get the point. That's what you're looking for. That's the question you want an answer to. We know by this point. So that also kind of bugged me. But overall, those are kind of nitpicks. But as you can see, they did get me a little bit worked up. It's just, let's try a bit more variety. Don't just have the same go-to kind of thing, right? I guess now is as good a time as any to briefly mention the companions and their roles in this episode. Unfortunately, Yaz is still kind of to the sidelines. We haven't really gotten anything with her yet, so hopefully we get some episodes in the future that flesh her out more and justify her actually being here. Because as of right now, and don't get me wrong, Mandeep Gill is a really good actress in this, but her character doesn't really serve any purpose. Next, I would say Ryan. He did some more things in this episode, but he wasn't really fleshed out very much, and he wasn't as prominent. Graham is the one who I felt was best serviced by the story, and I'm finding Graham to be the most likable out of the three. Bradley Walsh is giving a great performance. I love the way that he calls the Doctor Doc. I like when companions use like nicknames for the Doctor. I wouldn't want every companion to do it. I like those little things. It just adds a touch of character to them. And I liked Graham's attitude throughout it, and him trying to connect with Ryan, especially when he tries to bring up, that they should talk about Ryan's Nan's death. It seems like that. And I do like the tension that's between Ryan and Graham as well. And I'm really interested to see where that goes. But so far of the companions, Graham is leaving the most impression on me. Ryan is kind of middling. Yaz, none whatsoever. Oh, another thing I want to point out is we never really get as much of a sense of danger because we're told all these things that this planet is dangerous for, but we never see the effects. We're told that there are flesh-eating microbes in the water, but we never see this happen to anything or anyone. So you could remove that line and it would make no difference. You were told that the atmosphere is toxic, but we never see any sort of negative effects. They don't even seem sick by the end of the episode. So again, that just seems utterly pointless. We're being told it's more dangerous, but in a show we need to be shown that it's more dangerous. We need to see examples of this, and unfortunately we didn't, which made this planet seem a lot less threatening. It really was more just of a race against time that caused the tension than any sort of dangers from the planet. And of course, we also have the sniper bots and the remnants, which both play pretty small roles in the episode and ultimately don't really do much. Especially the sniper bots, they're useless. They shoot Epso, but they don't even kill him. All the other sniper bots, they just miss all the time. They're even worse than stormtroopers. And so, unfortunately, with them, they didn't really leave much of an impact. The remnants were a bit better, but they were disposed of really quickly before they could even really do anything. So honestly, there wasn't really a sense of threat throughout the episode, which it's a bit of a shame because they tried to make it threatening, but it just didn't work. I never really felt too much like the characters were in danger because we never, again, see the effects of these things. We hear about them. At least with the Remnant, we see a Remnant almost kill Epso, but I don't know, that's I guess the problem of having a planet where everything's dead and you don't have any disposable characters. Because then you don't ever get that sense of threat. Which is unfortunate, because I feel like this episode really could have used that. Another interesting thing of note is that it seems like maybe there will be a series arc this series. We've been told there won't be, but clearly something is being set up. Because you've got the mention of the Stenza, which is the race that good old Tim Shaw is from. They were the ones who were behind the destruction on this planet and all the life being wiped out. So they're clearly coming back. I'm certain we'll see them again in the finale. Maybe not Tim Shaw himself, but definitely the Stenza. So there's some sort of arc going on. Whether or not they'll continue to be mentioned throughout the series remains to be seen, but they're the overarching bad. That much is obvious. Additionally, we have a mention of something called the Timeless Child, which we have no idea what it is or what it could be. And that's obviously leading to something because Otherwise, there's zero point to that being in there. And it's just completely stupid. So it's got to be leading to something. And so, yeah, there's some sort of arc. We don't really have enough of anything to really say, what it could possibly be leading to. It's a bit disappointing in the sense that it would have been really interesting to see what a series without an arc would look like. But at the same time, it's, a bit more familiar territory, and it will be good to see how Chibnall handles a series arc. Although it seems perhaps it's kind of, I don't know, the Timeless Child thing kind of reminds me of Moffat's arcs, particularly when the remnants say that she doesn't know and are kind of like taunting her for it. That very much reminded me of In the 11th Hour when Prisoner Zero is taunting the Doctor for not knowing what caused the cracks in the universe, even though it was his own TARDIS. So we'll just have to wait and see where that goes. Getting near to the end now, we have, they reach the final end where the Ghost Monument is supposed to be. Epso and Angstrom win as joint winners, and Ilin takes them with them, but leaves behind the Doctor and her companions, which I really like that moment, actually.
Get us off this rock. Fine.
And them.
No.
No!
Which was great. But then it felt really weird, this bit, because the Doctor is so utterly defeatist in this scene. Like, at first when they go out to where the Ghost Monument is supposed to be, they see a tent, right? Because that's where Ilin is. He's inside a tent, a holographic tent. And as soon as she sees it, she's like, the TARDIS isn't here. We've done all this for nothing. And I'm thinking, what? No, you haven't. One, you haven't even checked, if the TARDIS is here or not. What if it's behind the tent? What if it's in the tent? You don't know. Two, the TARDIS is phasing in and out of time. So how do you know it hasn't, just not come yet? Three, it's not for nothing. You helped Epso and Angstrom reach the finish line and be able to win together so that both of them can get a lot of money and be able to live a safe and happy life on a safe planet. So no, it wasn't for nothing. You helped some people, which is great. So that felt weirdly defeatist of the Doctor, but then it gets even worse after the tent disappears, where she is just completely pessimistic. She's like, I'm sorry I got you all here. I'm sorry I can't take you home. Like, the TARDIS isn't here. What are we going to do? We're going to die. We won't even survive. And then the companions are all piping and be like, no, we'll just wait. No, it'll be okay. We'll be fine. We can get through this. And it's like, what? You've had one adventure with the Doctor, okay? Sure, maybe you'd start to trust her a little bit, but you've been taken against your will across galaxies to another planet, a deadly planet, and now you have apparently no way of getting back home. How are you okay with this? Like, sure, maybe you understand it's not her fault, right? Maybe you're not mad at her. But surely you'd be upset, or sad, or scared, or worried, or something, but they're all okay, and the Doctor's the one that's being negative. Whereas the Doctor is pretty much always the optimist. And, again, she has no reason to believe yet that the TARDIS hasn't just not come yet. So that scene just felt really out of place, especially when the companions had the attitude I thought the Doctor should have, and the Doctor had the attitude I felt the companions should have, because they have not spent enough time with her to be able to trust her this much, and to be able to be that supportive, and to be able to be that okay with potentially being stranded on a deadly planet after being torn away from their lives against their will. That just doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry. I could understand that if they've had at least, 3 or 4 adventures with her, at least. But this is literally their second adventure, and it's continuing right off of their first. That's just not enough time for them to have that kind of faith in the Doctor. I'm sorry. But, anyways, mini rant over. That gets resolved because the TARDIS does come back, so it turns out the Doctor was being pessimistic for no reason, which of course she was, because of course the TARDIS was going to come back. And I will say, the moment where the Doctor reunites with the TARDIS is glorious. I love when she starts hearing the noise and she says, "Come to Daddy," I mean Mummy. It's great when they throw in these subtle references to the change of gender. They don't make a big deal of it. They just make her casually forget that she's changed gender because, one, it really isn't important to the Doctor's character, and two, because she's been a male for most of her life. But then when she goes up to the TARDIS and she just kind of strokes it, and It's just, she runs up to it. It's a really nice scene. Then we go inside and we get to see the new TARDIS interior for the first time. Which, well, it's rather ironic because the exterior is quite possibly my favorite TARDIS exterior. I think it looks gorgeous. It's basically a modernized version of a lot of the classic series TARDIS models. The interior, not so much. I have a lot of issues with it. The biggest one so far is it's way too dark. There's barely any light in there, and not only that, but the walls and the floor is mostly dark too. It's a very dark set, not just in lighting, but the set itself. And I don't think the TARDIS should be a dark set. I think it should be lighter. It doesn't have to be white, but I think it should at least be a bit lighter in color. Then you have the big, bulky, fake-looking crystal pillars. I don't like the crystals. The pillars just look ugly. And I don't know, I'm not a fan of them. You have the three-sided police box on the inside. It sucks that we don't just have the doors. It's three sides now, so instead of feeling like it's like within the TARDIS exterior, it feels like it's behind the TARDIS exterior, which doesn't give as good of a sense of bigger on the inside. And I'm just not the biggest fan of the console. There's barely any controls on there. It's very empty and just looks kind of cluttered with circuits with barely any controls on there, which is, I'm not a fan of that. You gotta have all the buttons and levers and all that stuff. Come on. That's what the TARDIS is all about. You can't design a TARDIS console that has barely any of that stuff. I will give it some props though. I like the custard cream dispenser. That seems like a very doctor-y thing to have. And I do like the moving lighting details in the background on the walls. But overall, I'm not digging this TARDIS. And unfortunately, despite the exterior being my favorite, the interior is my least favorite. I'm sorry. I just don't like it. I saw the leaked image a couple months ago, and people said, yeah, it'll definitely look better on screen. And that's true. It looks better on screen, but it's still my least favorite. My main problem is the set itself. I'm just not a fan of the overall design. That's not to say it's objectively bad, but it's just not to my personal taste, which is unfortunate. Finally, we've also got our bigger on the inside moment, which is a little bit underwhelming. It just feels a bit too casual, I guess. You know, I don't know, it feels like they all kind of take it in their stride. Like, yeah, they're a little bit, agape, right? And Ryan says, this is proper awesome, but I never really got that sense of awe that I get with most other TARDIS interior introductions. Like with Rose, or with the 11th Hour, or the Pilot, or the Snowman. All of those are fantastic opening TARDIS scenes and very memorable. This one, I don't know, I just didn't get that sense of awe. It was just kind of, I don't know, I felt like it was a shrug your shoulder TARDIS introduction, which is a real shame. But, yeah, I guess that's pretty much all of the Ghost Monument. Introduced the last of the main major introductory stuff that needed to get out of the way. Interesting that it held off until the second episode for that. But overall, what do I think of this episode? Well, it probably sounds like I hate this episode, doesn't it? Because I've been going on a lot about the negatives. I'm sorry, but those were the things that stood out to me most. But at the same time, the negatives weren't terrible. They were things that bothered me, but they didn't bother me too much. Which is why I don't hate this episode at all, actually. I still found it to be, entertaining and generally enjoyable all the way through. I was never bored during it. And these things never got to the point where they annoyed me. Like, there were things that bothered me, but it never took away from my entertainment of the episode, annoyed me. Which is good. And as I said, the visuals are amazing. The acting all around was really good. And there are a couple of pretty decent scenes. But you know what? I guess that's basically how I'd describe it overall. Decent. Because it's got some pretty good stuff in there. It's got a lot of stuff that annoys me. But despite the quantity of things that bother me, the amount that they bother me isn't strong enough to pull it that far down. So, I think, and the other thing too is I really like the concepts as well. So I think, I mean, as far as Chibnall's episodes go, it's probably my second least favorite Chibnall episode after The Power of Three. But it's still decent. It's still fine. Forgettable. Not very memorable. But it's still got some good stuff in there. Some good ideas, some good characters. And it's decent. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. And yeah, that's basically my thoughts and opinions on the Ghost Monument. I guess thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and you can put your thoughts and opinions on the Ghost Monument down below. And yeah, so I guess I'll see you guys next week with Rosa.